Hello there, I'm Gregory Carlson. This is 1.6 part 3 and we have 5 to go. This is probably the hardest one because we have 2 square roots in the equation. So the way to solve it is to isolate the biggest square root. So let's add 3 to both sides. And that will give us the square root of 5x plus 3 outside of the square root is equal to the square root of 7x plus 9. So we have square root of 5x plus 3 equals this giant square root, and now we'll go ahead and square both sides. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky because this is going to give us the square root of 5x plus 3 times the square root of 5x plus 3 equals, on this side the square cancels the square root, so we just get 7x plus 9 on the outside. So let's be careful with this FOIL here. And the square root of 5x times that is just 5x. Remember, square root of 5x times the square root of 5x is just 5x. And then we have plus 3 root 5x plus 3 root 5x plus 6 equals 7x plus 9. So, I'm sorry, that should be plus 9 because it's 3 times 3. So that's plus 9 right there. Alrighty then. So what I would do next is subtract 5x on both sides. And so that gives, and look at this, we see how we have 9 on both sides? Let's subtract 9 on both sides as well, because that'll actually cancel both of them. So I get 6 root 5x. Now remember, that means 6 times the square root of 5x. That's what that means. 6 times the square root of 5x is equal to 7x minus 5x, which is 2x. So I know I said that the best thing to do at this point would be to isolate this square root, but if we divided the 6 over, it would create a fraction, and so let's not do that. Let's just go ahead and now square both sides again, because this won't be too bad. Here I have 6 times 6, and the square root times the square root. So that would give me 36 times 5x. Do you see how I got that? 6 times 6 is 36, and the root times the root is just 5x. On this other side, I would get this squared, which would be 4x squared. So let's do 36 times 5 equals 180. So I have 4x squared is equal to 180x. Let's subtract it over. Gives me 0 equals 4x squared minus 180x. And notice, we can factor here. Do you see that I think 4 goes into both of these and x goes into both of these? So let's take off the 4x, which would give me x minus, because 4x times x is 4x squared. Let's do 180 divided by 4. You get 45. So from here we can see our two answers. The first one is x is 0, and the part that makes that 0 is x equals 45. So that's kind of tricky, but those are the two answers right there. Now let's check them. Let's try plugging in a 0. 5 times 0 is 0, so the square root of that is 0. If I plug in a 0 here, I get 0 plus 9 is 9. The square root of 9 is 3. 3 minus 3 is 0. So this works. X equals 0 is a solution. Let's try plugging in 45. We do 45 times 5. Hit the square root button. So that gives me 15 on this side. Now let's do 7 times 45 plus 9. Let's take the square root of that. We get 18. 18 minus 3 is 15. So what do you know? This time both of the solutions check out, and so they're both right. You have to check your answers when you take both sides of the equation to a power. I will take off points if you put an answer that's not supposed to be one or you didn't mark it as extraneous. How about this next one? We have the square root of 4x equals a negative 40. Let's think about that. It's okay to put a negative in a square root because that just gives us I, which we've already talked about. But will a square root ever equal a negative number? The answer is no. So this actually has no solution. So it's okay to have a negative in a square root. That's okay, because that just would turn into I. But a square root will never equal a negative number. Even the square root of I is not going to give you a negative number, and so that's why this has no solution. How about this last one? We have the square root of 2x plus 12 equals the square root of x plus 2. Again, the two square roots we can just square. And because both sides are in the square roots, the square root cancels the square, and the square root cancels the square. So we get 2x plus 12 equals x plus 2. Very nice, not too much to do there, so let's subtract. Let's see, let's get all our x's on one side. So minus x gives me 2x minus x is x. Minus 12 minus 12, x equals negative 10. We took both sides to a power, so let's check our answer. If I plug in negative 10 here, I get 2 times negative 10, which is negative 20. And negative 20 plus 12 is going to be negative 8. So on the left side, I would get the square root of negative 8. If I plugged in negative 2 here, I'd get negative 10 plus 2, because we're plugging in negative 10. Negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. So I get negative 8 square root equals negative 8 square root, but that's okay. The two sides do equal the same value. In fact, this would be I root 8 equals I root 8. And you could even break that up into 2I root 2 equals 2I root 2 if you wanted to reduce the square root. So that's actually okay. So x is negative 10 is okay, so it's all right if we have a negative in the square root, but a square root will never equal a negative number. We have 2 more problems to go, so let's do this first one, and then I think I'll do this last one in part 4. All right. Notice here that it goes 4 to nothing. Do you see that x to the 4, x squared, and then nothing right there? So I'm going to show you a little trick. Because of the pattern where this gets cut in half and then we have nothing here, you can actually solve this by factoring. Watch. I need 2 numbers that multiply to make negative 30 and add up to negative 1. And those 2 numbers would be negative 6 and positive 5. So minus 6 plus 5. But now normally we would put x and x here, but this time we're going to put x squared and x squared. So watch what happens if I FOIL this. I get x squared times x squared is x to the 4 plus 5x squared minus 6x squared minus 30. And if you combine 5 minus 6, you get negative 1. So this actually works. Now this only works occasionally, but if it's x to the 4, x squared, and then nothing, you can factor it with x squareds and it'll work out. So because of the zero factor property, 2 answers live in here, 2 answers live in here. So let's solve those. X squared minus 6 is 0. X squared plus 5 is 0. So add 6, add 6. X squared equals 6. And take the square root of both sides. X equals positive negative square root of 6 are 2 of your answers. Let's solve this one. Minus 5 minus 5. X squared equals negative 5. Take the square root of both sides. You get x equals positive negative the square root of negative 5. And the best way to write that is positive negative I root 5. So you'll notice that I just took the negative sign out, which turned it into an I. So this equation had a degree of 4, and look, we get 4 answers. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the way, hopefully by now you're noticing that these conjugate answers are always pairs. They're always positive and negative. That's not on accident. We'll talk about that more later. So if it's to the 4 and then squared and then nothing, it'll work. You can factor it like this. And if you don't put all 4 answers, I'm going to take off points. So make sure you have all 4 answers. That strategy is not going to work on this one, though. We have something kind of weird going on. So I'm going to show you how to do this in the next video. And I will see you in part 4.